So just to introduce myself, like Ruby said, my name is Zosha Stikowski. I'm the Community Outreach Director of an organization in Washington, D.C. called Collective Action for Safe Spaces. And our mission is to empower people in the D.C. metropolitan area to build a community free of public sexual harassment and assault. I've been working with CAS for almost 4 years on community education and activism on the subject of public sexual harassment and assault. And my work for them has been covered by NPR, The Washington Post, and Slate, and other media outlets. I tell everyone in our community, and I'll tell you now, that we all play a part in creating communities that are safe and welcoming for everyone and where violence is not tolerated. And again, I think that's a very powerful and empowering place to be. So this picture that I just switched to, that's me speaking at an all-women's cycling event organized by a group of women cyclists here in DC. And to tell you briefly how I came to this work, I've experienced harassment in public since I was about 11, all around the world. I've lived in American cities and American rural areas. I've lived in cities internationally in Europe and Africa, and I experienced harassment everywhere. And about 4 years ago, after I'd lived in DC for a while, I had reached a point where I was really frustrated and I had enough. So I organized a demonstration that took place in a really busy nightlife area where I and many people I knew had been harassed and groped. And as a result of that work, I ended up joining the staff of CAS, which at that time was all volunteer. So I, like many of us that come into this work, really come to it from a place of personal experience. And again, I think that's a great way to kind of get for survivors and people who love them to get involved. So this next picture is me speaking at a slut walk in DC. So hopefully you are familiar with that event. If not, feel free to ask me during the Q&A. And this right here is from the bicycling event as well. When this picture was taken, I had just asked the audience to raise their hands if they had been harassed on the street that day. And as you can see, almost every hand is raised in this picture. So just to talk a little bit about how street harassment happens in the American context, there was a study published earlier this year by Stop Street Harassment. What it showed is that 65% of women, American women, said they experienced some form of street harassment in their lifetime. More than half of all women had experienced verbal harassment. 41% of all women had experienced physically aggressive forms of harassment, including sexual touching, following, flashing, and being forced to do something sexual. For men, 25% of men had experienced street harassment, and vastly more men who identified as LGBTQ experienced harassment than those who identified as heterosexual. And really importantly, for the American context, she found that people of color, people from low-income communities, young people, and LGBTQ people are disproportionately affected by street harassment, meaning that it starts earlier for them, it's often more frequent, and it's often more severe. So in a lot of ways, harassment is a...
Could you please slow down a little bit more? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
So in a lot of ways, harassment is experienced very similarly here in the States to how it's experienced around the world. You know, it's not only incredibly prevalent, as you can tell from the statistics I shared with you, but it also exists on a spectrum from less severe behaviors to more severe behaviors. For instance, there was recently a young woman in Detroit who refused the advances of a man who was harassing her in a club. And after he was escorted out of that club, he drew a gun and shot her and killed her. Just a few examples of stories that our followers have submitted to our blog. There was one woman who stopped a man from taking secretive pictures of a young woman on a city bus. There was another woman whose cab driver took her down a side street, locked her in the cab, and began masturbating in the cab. And another woman who was walking up the stairs from the metro, which is our subway system, who had a man lift up her skirt and touch her vagina. And these are stories just from the past 2 weeks. And again, just from people who have written into our blog. And as wonderful as our blog is, we know that it isn't capturing even close to everything that happens. So let's talk about what CAS is doing about it. One of the things we do is to raise awareness about the issue. Awareness is really important in this context because, as we know, there are a lot of people out there who still aren't convinced that this is a problem, or people who believe that it's a woman's fault or her responsibility to keep herself safe, when really it's all our responsibility to change the culture. But of course, the onus of the responsibility falls on harassers themselves. So one way we raise awareness is through our blog, where people write in about their experiences and we share them with the community. And we use social media and traditional media to get those stories out to a really wide audience. Another way we do that is through art and creative expression. So the picture you're looking at right now is an old flyer from an event we did several years ago to raise funds for a mural project, which we're still working on. So it's a temporary public art piece that we created in a partnership with a group of women and a local artist. So what we did is lead a workshop where we encouraged these women to share their stories and talk about what they had experienced in terms of harassment. And then we asked them to write messages to their harassers on these posters. And the artist photographed them and created these beautiful images. And so we really love these public art projects because they allow survivors to express themselves in a way that isn't direct to the harasser. So it's in a lot of ways it's more empowering and it can feel safer. And it also gets our messaging out into the streets. And of course, I also think that any community benefits from having, more beautiful things for everyone to enjoy. So for us, these wheat pastes and our upcoming mural are working to heal individual survivors and working to heal the community as well. So another thing we do, as I mentioned in my introduction, is we run a lot of workshops with people in the community. So we present to a variety of audiences, including bar staff, youth, and adults from all different walks of life. We have done a few workshops that are open to the public, but the majority of our workshops are contracted by other organizations, school groups, or authorities. So this has the primary benefit of having those organizations' client base or staff trained to respond to harassment and intervene in harassment. And it has the secondary benefit of building relationships with these bigger, more established institutions. So like a lot of activists, our goal is someday to be irrelevant. And of course, we do want harassment to end someday. But we also hope that someday people in all sectors and walks of life take this problem seriously and act to address it. So we hope that these institutions will eventually take on the work of training their clients and staff themselves. And one project we're working on right now is to develop a train-the-trainer program to help that happen. So what we teach in the workshops can be divided into two subjects. One part is things that you can do in the moment that harassment is happening, either by responding as the target of that harassment, or as a bystander when you see something happening to other people. So both of these strategies have the benefit of not just interrupting the violent behavior, but also of modeling pro-social anti-harassment behaviors for anyone who happens to be around. But the fact is that not everyone will feel safe responding or intervening in the moment, and there are other ways to do that culture change work that I referenced in my introduction. So we also teach ideas for community advocacy, using the arts, organizing teach-ins or demonstrations, etc. This picture that you're looking at right now is from a workshop that I did just a couple weeks ago at a local high school. With youth, we really like to work with them to create a personal Bill of Rights. So that's what the young woman in the picture is posing next to. And what we hope that they'll use this Bill of Rights as the framework for the change that they want to see. Often with youth, we're talking about micro-communities, so the neighborhood they happen to live in, or even just the halls of their school, where we know that they can see huge changes just from small interventions, putting up posters, having a few more people intervening in harassment that happens, or standing up to their friends. And really, the smaller the community, the bigger the impact of these interventions. But we do believe that the changes in these small communities can spread past the boundaries of that community. So finally, one important way to advocate for survivors of harassment and violence is to participate in systems-based advocacy, making the systems and services that exist for us actually serve us better. Our model for this advocacy is to train the people who experience harassment to take advocacy into their own hands and tell their stories. We really think these stories should be at the center of the work of all of these systems, and that's what we try to do through our advocacy is to put them there at the center and have them heard. This picture is of our policy director testifying at a hearing where we had organized about 50 sexual assault survivors who had reported their assaults and were re-victimized by the DC police. So in other words, they were blamed for the attack, treated poorly, never followed up with, and more. And we were one group in a broader coalition that pushed for some changes that would give the public more oversight on how police are dealing with sexual assault victims, so that hopefully in the future we'll be able to ensure that that survivors who report are treated well by the authorities and helped. Another big win we had was with our local transit agency, which we call WMATA, and that stands for the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. Since the very beginning of the organization, which started in 2009, about 30% of the stories that were submitted to our blog were things that were taking place on the WMATA system, so on subways and buses. We had reached out to them repeatedly over the years, but they ignored us every time. Finally, we decided to organize a group of survivors to tell their story at a DC City Council hearing on WMATA's budget. In DC, members of the public are permitted to give 3 minutes of testimony at any council hearing, and we really wanted to saturate the conversation and make our message really strong. And I do think it helped that it was a hearing about their budget and about their access to money. So perhaps that's one lesson learned from this experience. We asked for 3 things: a simple online reporting system that could be anonymous, a system-wide campaign of public awareness advertisements, and training for WMATA staff on how to respond to harassment. As a result of our advocacy, we ended up getting all of those 3 things. This was in 2012, and the first phase of the PSA campaign came out in that year. The online harassment portal also launched that year. We're working closely with them on the second phase of the campaign now, and on the training which they started to deliver last year. So I think what I want to close with is an observation about the power of stories. When we center women's experiences in our policy and in our actions, we are able to support them and give them the resources they need to be safe. So that's our challenge as activists and as people. So thank you for having me here. Thank you, WLP, for organizing this event, and for everybody watching and listening for being here, because the more we spread this anti-harassment message, the more we start to change how this program manifests globally. So thank you very much.
Well, a little bit about myself. I actually started work in the corporate sector and only joined AWAM as a member like 30 years ago. This is through the Joint Action Group, which we started in 1985, and I quit the corporate world in 2004 to join AWAM as their training manager, and finally now as their project director. So I'm talking about AWAM. Who is AWAM? AWAM is the All Women's Action Society in Malaysia. And we are a feminist organization, non-profit, with the vision to ensure that all persons, especially women, are living in a world free from violence and discrimination. So it's a very long journey. And what we have done in the past is working on the issues of violence against women, and also now we have taken on the gender equality issue. Well, if you talk about sexual harassment, it is both an issue related to gender-based violence as well as an issue of discrimination, health, and most of all, it impacts on especially women in the country. We started way back in the 2000s when we took on the issue of sexual harassment, and as I said, we collaborated with other women's groups, the Joint Action Group, and we have formed groups to manage what you call campaigns, and the latest of this grouping is what you can see now called SHOUT, which is Sexual Harassment Out. SHOUT is the result of working with not just women's groups, but also civil society. We have people from the legal fraternity. We have other NGOs from like the Chinese community. And with this that was started in 2001, we are looking at a standalone act to combat sexual harassment. In AWAM, when we talk about combating sexual harassment, we actually look at 3 levels of activities. The first level, of course, is with yourself, the individual. How we work with the individual is that we provide, I think our strength is in training. So we do a lot of talk, we do a lot of training, whether it's one-to-one or whether it's in a group. And we explain and we talk about the issue of sexual harassment to create the awareness to people to understand what is sexual harassment. We have spoken to people who says that I don't feel I'm harassed, but the fact is they don't understand what is sexual harassment. So it's important that this form of awareness is constantly raised to the public. The second form of combating the issue is really training and working with communities. So in terms of training, AWAM has already come to the level where corporate sectors are actually calling us to do training for them. And this is in part due to the past work that we have done together with other women's groups in lobbying for what we call changes in our law. So during the training, we do not just start off straight away talking about sexual harassment. We actually want the people to know how is sexual harassment connected to discrimination, how is sexual harassment connected to your rights as a person, and therefore we make little placards with statements that says what is sexual harassment, or comments and statements that is not so sexual harassment but still harassing, and also comments that it's both sexual harassment and discrimination. So they go through this process on their own, and they come to realize that, I go through this kind of a thing that is being stated, and they then become conscious that what they have gone through is actually sexual harassment. And another, in our training is normally interactive. It's not just talking down to the participants, but really to let them experience and therefore come to an awareness on their own. So apart from what I have stated just now about using statements, another form of the activity is really getting the participants to do an activity on massaging. So if the next slide maybe will be showing that's what it is. It's an exercise during our training where people are asked to give a massage to the person in front of them and then reverse the process. And very often when we ask the participants, how do you feel about the massage? Well, some groups will shout that, oh, that's wonderful. I could observe through the exercise, some of them actually felt uncomfortable, but they do not voice out. So when we ask them, okay, I noticed some people didn't speak or didn't enjoy it, but they didn't talk about it. They felt uncomfortable, and then people raised their hand, and through this exercise, many came to realize that when they experience sexual harassment, that's exactly what they did. They do not voice out, they keep quiet, and they just suffer in silence. So therefore, such training which uses games like this or what we call experiential learning helps to create awareness much more effectively than we talk to you what is sexual harassment, it is verbal, it is touching. So in this case, we were able to allow the participants to feel what is harassment, and therefore it's more effective in that sense. And the third level of engagement or combating sexual harassment, the way Awam sees it, is actually through the interaction and lobbying of the state. That is at the state level, whether it is at a local state, which is the individual state of the country, or with the federal government, which actually passes the law through the parliament. And in order for us to do that, we need to gather sufficient evidence. They won't listen if they don't have evidence. And therefore, in 1999, there was research done by a Dr. Cecilia Ng, and we discovered that research, which focused on a code of practice that was issued in the same year, saw only less than 4% of all the companies in the country practices what is laid down or stated by the code. And because of that, we also started to develop what you see now on your screen, a training manual, which we collaborated with the Women's Development Collective, a manual that is teaching or training not just employees, but also the employers. Because you'll be surprised when you do training with employers, they learn what is sexual harassment, and the fears that they have are similar with the employees. We have had training with corporates that hire us to do training from the CEO right down to their level of rank and file. And the fears are similar. They are afraid of false accusation. They find difficulty in what we call gathering evidence. And at the same time, they want to stop sexual harassment, but they do not know how. So in this manual, we don't just educate or facilitate the training with employees, we also do a training of trainers with the employers. And in that sense, we hope that the whole community in the workforce are a bit more informed, and the transformation we see when we talk about this kind of training with both employee and employer is amazing. Suddenly, people who don't believe in sexual harassment does a 360-degree turn and is championing the issue. And this is what we have seen in several of the companies that we do training. And coming back to engagement with the state, it's not always easy. It's one of the hardest challenge. If you have a government that is talk only, but is not committed enough to put into practice what they want to preach. So on one hand, they want to ensure that there is no sexual harassment. On the other hand, a bill that we have drafted since 2011 to this date has not gone through the parliament, and we have had so many roundtable meetings with the government that we hope the next time there is a roundtable meeting, it will definitely turn into something positive. But over the years, what we have done is that we have made inroads, starting with engaging both the state and the Federation of what they call employers, the Malaysian Employers Federation, and other angles like AWAM and the trade union to come up with a code. And subsequently, over the years, through very strong lobbying and advocacy work by NGOs, we finally had the Employment Act amended in 2012, where sexual harassment is now included in our Employment Act. With all these changes, you would think that we are happy and we can rest at our work. Definitely not, because the Employment Act is still lacking. It doesn't cover people in the public space. So we have the penal code. It needs a lot of evidence to prove sexual harassment, and therefore we continue with this campaign on sexual harassment. And in the next year, we have actually mapped out a roadshow that will be covering at least 4 states in the country to carry out a campaign that will talk about sexual harassment. And not just us, we are hoping to bring on board young women activists who are also working on the issue of sexual harassment to go through the process and to create the awareness to the public. And we hope that at every of this seminar, we can reach out to hundreds of members of the public, and through word of mouth, maybe will multiply to 500 and so forth. That's one of the plans that we have. We also continue to have training with the corporate sector and also our engagement with the ministry that is responsible to table the standalone. At the same time, engaging the Attorney General's office on reforms to laws that may impact on sexual harassment. These are some of the things that we are going to do and we hope to do. And I think at a point of time, really depends on how the situation is in the country. If they are still not paying attention to all these efforts of lobbying, and the training is not able to create the change that we are looking at, then perhaps we will take on to the streets as we do in terms of like the rape cases or domestic violence cases, because sexual harassment is so fine a trait that it's difficult for people to see whether they are facing with sexual harassment or not. And one group of people that we really want to engage with are the men. I think that if men are the problem, they should also be the solution. And this is why AWAM is very actively trying to involve men to stop violence, in particular violence against women. And if this is what we are trying to aim at, we want to make a call to the men to stop the violence and at the same time, do not remain silent, because some men do face sexual harassment. And many of the women that face sexual harassment, and especially male participants, when we talk about sexual harassment affecting their members of family, the way that I've just explained, that instant change could be seen in them. And we are hoping to call that, well, men in Malaysia, men all over the world, you need to stand up and voice out and do not remain silent. Many of the men out there do support this issue, but have not made any effort to break the silence. So in conclusion, I think that harassment is such therefore we need to work together to ensure that if you see someone face sexual harassment, don't say that it's not my problem. It's this. Because if you don't stop it today, the next day it may be really touching on you. So with that, I'd like to thank WLP for giving me this opportunity on this platform. And if there's any what we call questions or clarification, we take it on later. Thank you. With regards to the challenges
we still can't hear you. If you can,
the issue is Malaysia is still a very patriarchal country, and when we talk to men, they still have this notion that well, they know what is best, and sometimes it's very difficult to convince them that because of the gap between the male and the female equality, it becomes very difficult to convince them to stand on the side to support women who have experienced sexual harassment. The only thing is that if their own partner, their own spouse, or their family women has been experiencing sexual harassment, then they are the ones who will actually speak up for the women. And this is evident from the service that we provide in terms of counseling and legal information. It's usually the men who comes in. So we hope that with more gender sensitizing, with more understanding of the patriarchal structure in our society, we can break it down and dismantle it so that men are more aware about why sexual harassment happens and therefore could support better or even stop the sexual harassment. So I hope I have answered that question.
Thank you for the question. It's practically my favorite subject. So we've been struggling with this issue, and I think that it's something that as activists we all have to think very carefully about, because just because we're doing work that benefits everyone and is for the greater good doesn't mean that we shouldn't be supported and we shouldn't be able to support ourselves in this work. And so I think that without spending too much time getting into the details, one of the strategies that we've been exploring very closely is how to link our work with fundraising. So when I was talking about our workshops that we usually do in partnership with other organizations, we often ask, and that's one to help support our work. Again, we're often working with organizations and groups that are more established, that already have funding. And so, it's one way that we can link our actual advocacy and our work to fundraising, which I think is really, really important for activists who are looking to build a sustainable movement. And another thing we do is, again, kind of explore this idea of fundraising directly from the people who we're benefiting and working with. So our organization has a very active online presence, a very active blog, and a great deal of our fundraising happens online as well and is targeted to those same people. You know, I do think that participating in fundraising, even by giving, is a really empowering experience, because you are, by sharing your resources, you are making this work possible. And so that's kind of the message that we put out there. So I hope that that helps.
Rule 3. And what we do is, initially we just do training with men. We write an open invitation to invite men for our training once a year. Then since last year, what we did is we organized a run. It's just a 7-kilometer run. But when we organize this run, we actually invite celebrities who are well known to the community to speak up against violence against women, not specifically just for sexual harassment, but on all forms of violence against women. So from there, we conduct sessions on understanding why the causes of violence, and also why men should be part of the whole society to combat against violence. So some of them are really good. They actually go on the media, on the TV, to speak about their own experience, how their mothers were affected, or they would talk to other men to say that it's not right to be violent with the women. And I guess this is how we bring them in to combat sexual harassment or any other forms of violence. If that's the answer for you. Well, actually, Malaysia has signed the CEDAW in 1995. The unfortunate thing, they have only made one, and up till now they have not submitted any other report. So as far as working on CEDAW, we are trying to work with the Institute of Higher Learning or any community, linking CEDAW with leadership. And as we explain about CEDAW, we are hoping that more people will raise the awareness that it's an important document or bills of rights for women. And in working with the government, every platform that we meet with the Ministry of Women especially, we have been pressuring them, not just us, but Move Women's Group, have been pressuring the government to come up with the report to the CEDAW committee. And so far, the last that we heard of is that the report is now ready, but they have to be vetted through before it can be submitted to the CEDAW committee. So we hope to see a final government report to the CEDAW committee. On the NGO side, in this role of working on CEDAW, all the NGO movement is quite working together, and we have came up with an alternative CEDAW report, which we actually submitted to the CEDAW committee, if I'm not mistaken, the previous year. So we are working not just with NGOs, but together pressuring the government actually to continue with working on the report and submit it as soon as they can.
Okay. Thank you, Betty.
Work, is it just on sexual harassment, or we work with the other AWAM and the joint action group that we are part of? We are all very focused in our own area of advocacy. However, whatever support another when it comes to any issue, like for instance, ethnicity and religion. And therefore, we don't just leave our partner organization sisters in Islam to talk about religion. We also raise religion from other forms of religion, including Islam. So we collaborate, we integrate, and we work together. If the issue is affecting women, we work together for the rights of the women. Thank you.